Hello dear audio wizards and fellow music makers, and welcome to this 9th episode of the Compression Bible. In the last episode we talked about the different type of compressors, the analog ones, about FET compressors, VCA compressors, and Bw compressors, opto compressors, and their different type of flavors, and also the specific use cases where they all shine. So if you don't want to miss on that, be sure to check the previous video. Today we're going to talk about plugins and put them under the microscope of plugindoctor to see the different behaviors of those plugins. I wish you a nice video. Cheers. So let's put a few compressors on plugindoctor test bench to see and to read a bit what they have happening under the hood. So because I showed you many things with Pro-C2, let's start with Pro-C2 from FabFilter. So first thing is, if you look at the linear analysis, we see that actually the frequency response stays totally unchanged. So on that regard, the compressor is totally transparent. It's not touching, it's not making any EQ changes, right? Whatever the mode I'm dialing, the frequency response is always exactly the same, right? Let's have a look now at the harmonic analysis, the harmonics generated. We see here that actually this plugin is also creating harmonics, and that those harmonics, wait, let me move this here. The plugin is creating harmonics, and that the harmonics are linked to the ratio. The more I will compress, which makes sense, the more I will create harmonics, and the lower the threshold, the lower the noise floor. So we see that the harmonics are directly linked to the ratio. No compression happening. I have just some background noise. This is not correlated. And when I move the threshold, there is no impact on the noise and on the harmonics. But when I dial in the ratio, as soon as I start to compress, I will create some slight harmonics. They decay more or less fast. The higher I compress, the more harmonics. To put things into perspective, usually the saying goes that we have around 6 decibels of dynamic range, of 6 decibels of volume for 1 bit. So if you are working at 24 bits, your usual loudness range is 144 decibels. So minus 125 is close to total silence. It's barely hearable. But that's not the only thing. Does you see also the time constant is impacting the harmonics. Let's change the frequency generated here. Let's play a higher frequency. And here what do we see? That if we are not oversampling, the plugin is not oversampling, those harmonics get also aliased and we find subharmonic partials. If you don't know what this is, and if you have questions about that, I can only highly recommend you watching my video on distortion and EQ. But what's happening if I turn on oversampling? Now, this is much more cleaner. So this means that actually for many single channel work, this is not something of a big deal. But if you are using this compressor for mastering, you might want to turn on the oversampling, right? And this has a tremendous impact on everything. Look at this, or without. You see here we are generating. These are very low, but these are there. And if I increase the ratio, I'm increasing the harmonics generated, right? So fast attack, fast release. And there's another interesting thing to be seen here, is that actually those harmonics, they change depending on the mode. I'm going to turn down the frequency generated here. So I'm changing the modes. You see those harmonics are not at all the same. I mean, some are close to each other, like mastering and bus are pretty close, right? Because mastering and bus compression should work more or less on the same. But on clean, classic, or opto, you have very strong different behaviors. If you look now at the curve, with strong ratio, let's dial in a lower threshold. Now we see with hard knee, even in clean mode, even with a totally hard knee, there is some rounding off, which is a way to have it cleaner, I guess. Classic, we have the hard knee as should be dialed in. Opto, we have a softer knee, and vocal will even be softer. See, vocal is starting to compress already very, very, very low. This is allowing the compressor to work in a very natural and transparent way to have this leveling amp feature we are after. Mastering, straight, bus, straight, and pumping, straight. There's another feature, we can actually reduce the range, which means that above a certain range it will come back at 1-to-1 transfer curve. So we can lower the compression and compress just a part of the signal and then come back. And so the idea here is that you are taming the dynamics that are happening in a certain range of loudness, but above a certain range you are keeping the transients intact. You can put the threshold pretty low, and you can let the really low information content untouched and the very high information content untouched. So you are just squeezing in the mid-range content, which can be a nice way to add thickness to a sound without squashing the transients. Putting the threshold lower than where the transients are peaking at, and then turning back some range here to keep some range untouched. Nice trick, right? If we come back to the harmonics, there's one thing I forgot to show here, is the impact of look ahead. And this is why we say that for mastering purposes you should always use look ahead. We're going to talk about limiters. I'm going to talk about limiters in another long video, but you see that the look ahead has a tremendous impact on the harmonics that are generated from that compressor. I turn on a bit of the attack time. Longer attack, longer threshold, longer attack and longer look ahead compared to head. Big difference, especially when I start to use oversampling. Now I have a very, very, very clean compressor in the mastering range, no harmonics at all. So of course it's always a question of finding the nice setting for your needs. You are not going to compress the same way a dynamic beat than a vocal, than a master bus group. You are not compressing everything with the same settings, and sometimes you are more after the dynamic control, sometimes you are more after the color the compressor is impacting. Let's call another one that I really love to use. Let's have a look now at Shadow Hill's mastering compressor. So this compressor, as I said, has actually two stages of compression, one optical and one discrete, which is a VCA. So let's first look at harmonics. We see that actually this is also working as a smooth equalizer. We are sub-frequency here, but it has an impact at the around 20 Hz range, right? And in fact, this little difference is also what's lovely about this compressor. I use it a lot in mastering. Most of the time, iron or steel. And steel adds some warmth in the low-medium area. And actually, when you look at this, it makes sense because it's actually rolling off a little bit the lower area and then rolling off a bit the top end. So rolling off the top and the lows makes the low-mid feel a bit more present. That's one part of the answer. In steel, on the contrary, compared, the steel mode has a bit more loudness in the low end and is still rolling off the high. So this is increasing the body of a sound. So this is a very, very gentle type of EQ. It's not really, it's very, very wide Q, but it's adding something to the sound. If I look at the harmonics analysis between the modes, you see also that the harmonics are changing a little bit. Not that much, but a little bit. And so this is also impacting something in the sound, leading to presence, leading to a feeling of warmth. If I would play some higher frequency tone, like here now, you see I have a little bit more harmonics with the iron mode than I have with the steel mode. Steel is a bit more clean, iron has a bit more. You see this part as well. While Michael is supposed to be the cleanest from all. This is how they brand it in their manual, but you see that actually it's not the case. Michael has a bit more harmonics here than there. You see here the spike. So let's have a look now at the Vertigo, which is a VCA compressor. We see here again very clean, no harmonic changes, no tonal balance changes. And about the harmonics, it's generating quite some, that we can see that in fact those harmonics are also related to the ratio you dial in and to the time constant of your compressor. The shortest, the more harmonics, the longest, the lowest harmonics. This is a very great compressor to get transparent, pretty transparent sounding punchy drums as well. It's VCA, it's clean. If we were to compare that to Ozone, it has no oversampling, but when you don't dial in the limiter, the compressor is pretty clean. The last one I wanted to show you is the VX Townhouse by Brainworx, which is an emulation also of the SSL 4G bus compressor, and it's a very nice compressor to add thickness and mojo, and we'll see why, because by default it's already dialing quite some harmonics. Usual settings for this would be around 30 milliseconds attack time and very short release to get this kind of pump you want on a master bus compressor, but there is more to that. The downfall about it is this. It's something that took me a bit of time to realize, because I had no speakers that were really rightfully playing the low end. They had a roll-off at around 40 before. So I realized that actually while turning this on my masters, it was rolling off a little bit the low end, which is not a problem if you use individual tracks. It's not a problem in mix. It's not a problem in tracks that have no sub content frequency, yet it's there, and same goes for the extreme top end. So it's a nice thing to use on groups, I think, on individual tracks, but I wouldn't recommend it on master buses, except if you really know what you're doing. What we'll see here is something really interesting I didn't talk about on the SSL bus compressor. Let's dial in the dynamic part. Okay, so let's change now the ratio. Let's lower the threshold to get a proper compression phase happening. Okay, so now I'm let's go for -20. Okay, so we see our compression point is more or less here, right? First thing which is interesting is that actually we see there is a little increase here at the beginning, like the low level information is boosted. It's not totally flat. This is the first tool I discovered that has this. Maybe there are others, but it's the only one that I know. Of course, if the release is longer, we'll have a little drop because it stays compressed when the level is dropping. But with a very short release, it has this very snappy reaction time, and it is already boosting the signal at low level information. But that's not what I want to talk here. Let's look at this point here where the knee is happening. I have a 10:1 ratio. Now I'm going to flip to 4:1 and to 2:1. See the difference? The point where my compressor starts to compress is not the same. This is a weird behavior, and it was the same happening in the SSL compressor. That is, there is no control over the knee of the compressor, but somehow there is a relationship between ratio and knee. If you enjoyed this content so far, be sure to like the video, and I promise I will keep more videos like this coming. And also don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss any other bit. Alright, so after all these technical explanations, I think it's about time we talk about glue. Glue is a term you might probably have come across so far in your journey about compression. It's something that many people are talking about, but I wanted to make it a bit more clear. The idea of glue or gluing things together is in fact to use a compressor to create unity between a separate set of sonic elements. The main case is a drum group where you are actually pushing together the different elements, the kick, the snare, the hi-hats, but it can work with different melodic elements, with guitars, if you are panning guitars, with backing vocals. The concept is always the same. It's actually bringing together, creating a form of cohesion between several elements. And how is it achieved? The first rule about glue is that because it's a bunch of tracks where the individual tracks are already controlled in the microdynamics aspect of things, it means that actually the transients or the movement, the printing, the pumping effect is already printed on every individual track. You are not trying to achieve that. What you want is really bringing together the elements, and in order to bring together elements, first thing is that you will want to let a part of the transient pop through. You don't want to squash the whole dynamics, and you want just to tame the elements that are too loud, to actually, like you would have people doing the cue, and at some point some people are a bit like moving out of the cue. You are bringing them all together. While doing so, you are actually pushing down some elements when louder elements are playing, but so the overall level stays the same, and it is creating a kind of natural logic between the elements. The most hearable thing about glue is if you are applying this to a drum bus, and you will hear the hi-hats will start to pump when the kick is playing or when the snare is playing, and it will create a natural ducking that is blending things together. The other aspect of gluing together is that actually by reducing the overall dynamic range of sounds, you create more cohesiveness. Because of course, if something is very loud and then something very quiet, it feels more apart. That actually when everything is getting more close together, it feels more like a whole. Okay, so here we have a track with some tabla loops. I'm gonna remove that for a second. We have one loop playing this, another one playing this, and together they play this. I bend them left and right to create some space, some width, but they feel not like working together yet. So what I did is first add this Brainworx off, you hear the high impacts are pushing a bit above the rest. It feels unnatural. It doesn't feel like really working together. And when the compressor comes in, it blends things better together, right? Another example could be the difference between this without the glue and this. In this case, I didn't use only compression, I also used a little bit of saturation on my bass group, a bit of limiter. If I'm gonna look at my melodic group, for example, here I have many different things going on. I have a bit of the Townhouse. Let's play that for a second. Without. You hear there are some elements peaking above. It's not really working together, and with the compression on the group, it much more works as a whole thing, adding the sidechain from the kick. Without. With. Without. We hear the bass coming from lower and getting too much up front. Some of the movements in the synths are still a bit too intense. I'm playing it last time with. Without. So you might think that the synth is a bit too quiet, but if I push it louder, then it will become louder in the louder part. So it's, you could say I want to tame all the dynamics from all the individual channels at like nothing, but then your track is lifeless. And I think there's a balance to be found between controlling the dynamics of the individual tracks and at the same time letting them breathe a little bit and then gluing them together in some groups to imprint the life. So some elements can become a bit louder at some moments, but the overall loudness is more in control. So you keep. And this is also a nice interesting thing. At the beginning of this whole compression Bible, I talked about inwards dynamics and how you need to use sidechain and how people are only talking about squashing but not looking at the inwards dynamics. And in fact, this is also linked to that first topic. While you use group compression, you are creating this kind of inwards dynamics of natural sidechains where the louder element from a group of elements is actually compressing the whole group and making space for itself by lowering the whole group. But so the overall loudness feels the same, but you create movement. It's not every channel is just squashed and flat and it making a cake of one pile on top of each other. It's actually getting some control, letting some life, and then pushing things together. I hope this was helpful and that it will help push your music to new heights. As usual, if you like this content, feel free to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, and to comment if you want to interact with me. In the coming video, we are going to talk about the difference between multiband compression versus broadband compression, the difference between multiband compression and dynamic EQ, the difference between limiters, clippers, and compressor, and lastly about how to set up a compressor to avoid any unwanted total harmonic distortion on the low end. See you soon for more. Bye bye and take care.